Okay, it appears to be working now. It just had a poor connection and it would not stream. So I had to set that up. You get a chance to watch me walk away. Yeah, there's some major YouTube issues. I think everybody in the country is trying to stream. Okay, so if you have any questions, please ask. Just a few minutes. Just going to finish up Egyptian culture, do the Phoenicians and Judea tomorrow. And my plan was to have a test on Friday. I think I'm going to do it and make it online, but I've not decided yet completely. There's all kinds of logistical problems. We're just going to figure it out. Okay, so we're talking about this area right here on the map. This is the height of the Egyptian under Ramses, and I mentioned Ramses during the video. There's Kadesh right there where he won his great victory by losing, but getting there first to tell his story. So we're talking about this area, Phoenicia, Judea, Canaan, right here, and then how they spread out throughout the Mediterranean. And connected a lot of Egyptian culture to Greek culture. All this is coming. Okay. So if you look on Teams, I did put a review list for the test. And on that, I'm just going to pick some of those terms and ask multiple choice. For once, if there's an asterisk, I'm going to do a short essay that I call short ID. Some of you might know what that is. And what it is, I'm going to give you a term or a phrase. And you must give me 3 to 4 sentences, so a very short essay. That way I can ask a lot of questions and you have to write. But 3 to 4. Any questions? Sorry I didn't put up my little monitor. It asked me on my phone because this stupid computer isn't working. That's my sound effect. You like that? So there's no questions. If you have a question and you're watching this later, please just send me a message on Teams or email. Get back to this. Short IDs. So I'll give you a term. You must explain what it is. And that means give information like what it is, where it is, when, that kind of information. So what, where, when. Some basic information. So a couple important facts about it. And then give an example of it. Give an example of it. And so if I mentioned something about irrigation in Mesopotamia, talk about how they built dams, and this would allow for food production and allow for that sort of thing. So give a specific example. And then the last part, the last sentence, the most important thing, you must explain why it's important. So I guess how it happened, that's more the examples. How is it happening? What, when, where, how, but why is it important? And what did that lead to? Cause and effect. And so if I mention irrigation, and you talk about that but they would build dams and irrigation canals that allow for increased food production, allow for more production of barley, etc., something like that. But then you could say that it led to the storage of foods as a food surplus, so they could create cities with specialized labor to build the great cities and language, etc. So that's basic information about it, what, where, when, examples, that's the how, and then why it's important. What did that lead to? That is what you have to get down. If you don't have what it led to, you won't get full credit. But that is a short, that's what I call a short ID. Basically, it's the meat of a paragraph of an essay. So, if it has an asterisk next to those terms, those will be choices I'll give you. So I'll give you like 6 choices and you must short ID 4 of them. So you have a choice to pick the ones you want. So not all of them will be on there. But I'm not going to tell you which ones. All right, so with that one, a couple things about life in ancient Egypt, then tomorrow Phoenicia. And so, like most ideas, there's going to be a pyramid of social classes, and I put this very generic pyramid for the heck of it. But the very top, the upper class, the priests, the nobility, all up here, eventually soon to be called the pharaoh, big house, and they're on the very top. By the way, the pyramids, you can see everybody. The pyramid's very tiny, so it'll go like this and then out like that. That's more accurate, much like it is today. The very top, got to run everything, and then everyone else is on the bottom. But the priest, nobility, eventually more and more this is going to be hereditary. Hey, every society does this. They rig the system to help people like them and their family stay in that same class. They all do it. Then they'll say they're all descendant of gods in Egypt, so therefore, of course, our children must be the next leaders because they're descendants of gods. And it's amazing how that works. Then the so-called, I put middle class, I didn't know where really else to put it, but these are people who do very skilled work, but they have, because it's skills that not many people have, it's more in demand, so they have a little extra money so they can live with some of the trappings of the very top. So, right here, tiny group. And the vast majority then are farmers who basically had, they lived with the 3 seasons. The life was very constant along the Nile. Flood. I'm sorry. Yeah. Flood, mud, that's when they planted, and then the dry seasons when they harvest. Boom, boom, boom. Start over again. The constant Nile. So these are the basic classes. And then there are slaves. And should add, these are the vast majority of people here. And there's something about the slaves that made them be different. They were prisoners, they were captured. If you're thinking that has something to do with race, not only did it have nothing to do with race, the concept of race had not been invented yet. The concept of different races comes from colonialism, especially in what is now the United States. So, it was always a big issue if they unified. A lot of what happened is when times got bad, they suffered the most, and there'd be disruption down there that might bring the whole thing down. So much of the job of these people are to control them. How do you do it? Make sure the slaves and the lower class don't unify. So life, constant farming, as we mentioned before. There's a few symbols of this. There's a lot of drawings of this. There's farming, a plow that they stole from the Sumerians. Oxen had been domesticated. I like this picture with the dates and bananas along the shoreline. And farmer planting the seeds. And so that's where the upper class. There is a much more upper class family. It's for the British Museum. Husband, wife, children. By the way, you notice different colors of skin. Colors of skin was irrelevant except for the simple fact that there were people with different colored skins. And in the cities, a family might live in a very small hovel or hut, but it'd be that basic nuclear family. Husband, wife, children, living together, and they basically have their own places. In the countryside, which is the vast majority of people, they would get the extended families, or the poor within the cities too, were all living together. And this is very much like it is today. Working class people are more likely to live with an extended family, and people in rural areas are more likely to live with an extended family. And so you see this, it's not a heck of a lot different except for the simple fact there's more cities and it's just different now. But here's one from a tomb, and it's that very same picture, and it shows how family life, but it's all basically dictated by the Nile. And if you look here, it has surrounded by water. Here's irrigation, planting dates and palm trees along the side. Here they are. Here's, but where are we at? I lost it. The plowing, and then you see them harvesting the wheat right there, making bread. Very good picture of this talking about the Nile. I just want to put that whole thing out there. In ancient Egypt too, women had a variety of roles. Early on, just when societies were beginning, women had probably the greatest amount of power. Almost certainly it was women who did the first cultivation, figured out the different hybrids, what the plants would grow. But when this happened everywhere, as they became more permanent and this concept of ownership came in, men who a little bit bigger and the ones who do the fighting use that power and the ability to fight to take control over women, own them. And in the older kingdoms and middle kingdoms, women became the property of your husband. That's a big shift. And we'll see this a number of different times. In colonial America, women had a great amount of power. But in the new United States, in the Industrial Revolution, women lost significant economic power. Legal is a different issue. But as it became more of an empire in the middle and late kingdoms, women did get some more rights. Women could own property, could divorce, some more rights. So the role of women changed, but when the Greeks took over, women lost some influence, and then when the Romans took over, women lost almost all their power, especially lower class women. Really quick, religion. So nothing about religion. By the way, that's Ak, the symbol of life, and I've seen people that, in fact, I just saw somebody wearing that a couple weeks ago, and so there's still some people who do follow some of the, or still remember some of the religions from Egypt, but they believed in more than one god, polytheism. We talked about that with Sumeria. And the gods were half human, half animal. You see this in a number of other religions. Some of the gods are more human. Like we'll get to the Greek gods and the Roman gods, and we won't get to the Norwegian gods so much, but more human form. But this was animal and human, this combination. And it also shows kind of the importance of animals, the importance of the memory of looking back at animals and how they were able to adapt faster than humans. But there's a great belief in the afterlife, and that fits in with the burial rituals and the pyramids and all that. And those are some of the gods right there. You can see in the background. These are the most important gods. So Ra, which we've talked about before, Amun-Ra, the sun god. You also see sometimes as the king of the gods. Horus, the son of Iris and Osiris. Osiris, right there, is the god of the dead. Anubis, you see in the middle, that's the god of embalming. Obviously a very important god for a society who believes in the afterlife and must mummify. And of course, Iris, the queen of the goddesses. And there's going to be a whole Iris society. In fact, there'll be a cult of Iris when we get to the Roman Empire. And so, Ra is probably the most important god. I like Iris and Osiris. But the ones we need to go for sure are Ra and Iris. Let's just stick with that. I'm just kind of, what gods do we need to know? So it's Iris and Ra. Here they are again. Iris and Ra. These are all the gods here. And you notice I like Bastet, who is a cat. Set, Ra, little falcon. Horus, Osiris, Isis. Or here's another picture. You can see all the gods. Ammon, that would be the disc god. We'll get to, we already talked about him. And Ra's the sun god, I'm sorry, right there. Hathor. I just wanted to get the gods out and see, you can see the figures, some with a hyena, different animals. Thoth. Right here. By the way, you notice Horus with the pharaoh's cap on. And you see a lot of image of the god. This is the weight ritual to weight good, or basically good versus evil for the afterlife, and you notice the pharaoh right there. But part of the reason we know so much about their gods is writing. They use what's called hieroglyphics. Now, a lot of cultures use hieroglyphics, and it's best known for Egyptian. And the first one is called Linear A. We saw this with Sumerian hieroglyphics too, before they got the cuneiform. What they would do is Linear A would be a picture to represent kind of letters. It's a little more complicated than that. It went first from pictures to pictures representing letters to etchings of the pictures. And eventually we were able to denote the letters to Greek and Roman letters. So that's what we see right here. So, ah. Linear B was an etchings of these to mean words, very much like cuneiform. And so you would have these pictures to represent the various figures, various, as you can see, important commodities: spice, olive oil, horn, wheeled cherry, etc. And if you see all these, eventually these would adopt into essentially letters. This was one of the great mysteries. So most of this would be lost by about 400 AD. And then it became little bits and pieces would come back all through the Middle Ages into Europe. And then one of the great mysteries in Europe would be what these hieroglyphics meant. And they were lost in Egypt too, and in the Arab world. They weren't sure what they meant. So they had these incredible archaeological finds beginning in the 16th century. And Europeans had no idea what they meant. No idea. But during the French invasion of Egypt, which we'll get to in the late 1790s, France was trying to get to Egypt as a way to threaten. Napoleon was trying to threaten British-controlled India. Failed miserably, but part of the looting of everything you could find. Oh, there is a Linear A and B, but the vulture to a letter. How do we know this? Oh, jump right here. The Rosetta Stone. They found the Rosetta Stone. That's the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum. And it's been moved around. The last time I was there, you walk in the British Museum and it's just right there in front of you. It's like, wow, that's the Rosetta Stone. And then they moved it to other places. But the Rosetta Stone was discovered and stolen and taken back by the French. After Napoleon was defeated, the British took it from the French, and now it's in the British Museum. This was in 1813. But right here is Linear A, right there is Linear B. So you have that, all telling one story. And then in the bottom, it's Greek. And that allowed for translation, because they knew Greek. And so if they could read Greek, then they could translate it to here, and then translate it to the hieroglyphics. And that would have opened up, in fact, totally change the knowledge of Egyptian history. Now they could go back and read what's on many of these tombs and stelas and the pyramids, and know English history is or Egyptian history is like an explosion of knowledge. And you'll notice it is broke, it doesn't have everything on there, but it has enough. It has enough to, they can begin to fill in the blanks. Use deduction to say, okay, we know what part of these means, we can figure out what the rest is, and then use it for, cross-check it and figure out if it works. That's how you decipher. And so they found a number of papyrus documents that have been preserved because of the dry climate in Egypt. Papyrus, it's reeds that grows along the Nile. They would let it rot a little bit, crush it, get a paste, and begin to make documents like you see right here. And this is in Greek, and they found enough material where they could begin to decipher some of what they were reading, not only Egyptian, but Greek and Roman material done in papyrus, and this would revolutionize the knowledge of history. And lastly, Egypt, because of irrigation, and a little bit is taking from the Sumerians. They're not dumb. Because they needed to know when the flood was, how much of the flood was going to happen, they began to develop math. Here are Egyptian numerals. Obviously, that's pretty basic. It was base. It was kind of base 10. As you can see, I love the symbol for 1,000,000. 100,000 though might be the best. A frog. But the big thing is they revolutionized geometry. Volume and area for reservoirs, so they could measure reservoirs during the dry season to have it last for whole irrigation. But then, once you have geometry become crucial for the invention of pyramids. This Egyptian geometry, which is very, very complex. I had to do a little bit of it in history of math, and I just remember having my mind blown. But this would go to Greece, and the Greeks would build on it. The geometry we know today, Euclidean geometry, was Greek geometry based upon Egyptian geometry, using the same tools, a compass and a straight edge. And then geometry, and we'll talk a little bit about this tomorrow, incredibly crucial for sailing. They also needed a calendar, so because they needed to know when the floods were coming. A 365-day calendar, and also they had shockingly advanced medical expertise. Splints have been around for thousands of years, but more advanced splints, and clearly the setting of bones, settings of bandages. They did some surgery. There's examples of some dentistry, even some brain surgery, removing tumors or removing infected skin, removing limb, and people maybe surviving. But also, some of this came from poking around and messing around with bodies when they were trying to get them ready for mummification. And lastly, when the Hystians came, especially the second time the Hystians came after the Middle Kingdom, they brought with them the vertical loom. And this vertical loom and new way to weave would lead to not only rugs, but different clothing. And this would go, ironically, through, I'm thinking down Judea, what is now Palestine and Israel, into Egypt, excuse me, and then back up into Greece, and then Rome. And the vertical loom would be, it's still used today. Now it's a horizontal loom, and now a power loom, but pretty advanced. So that is Egypt. We will come back to Egypt tomorrow. Semitics. All right. On that happy note, if there's no questions, I'm going to go. Please. You are responsible for this. Be ready for me to put this up as an assignment. On that happy note, goodbye.